My grandson asked me not to enter his room without knocking. One night I heard him having a strange conversation, as if he were talking to himself. But when I opened the door, he was sitting in the dark, staring into an empty corner, his face white as chalk. I'm glad you're here with me. Please listen to my story till the end and let me know which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. I had always thought of our house as a place where sound carried too easily. Old walls, thin doors, a layout that made privacy feel more like an idea than a guarantee. Yet for most of my life, it never mattered. I raised my daughter there, and later, when she divorced and moved 2 towns over, my grandson Ethan started spending more and more weekends with me. It became our rhythm. Quiet mornings, shared breakfasts, small rituals that fit neatly into my late 50s and early 60s. He was 14 now, tall, a little awkward, but with that gentle politeness that made teachers say he was mature for his age. I love that about him. Love the steadiness, the soft humor, the way he still hugged me without rolling his eyes. Maybe that's why the shift unsettled me so deeply. It didn't happen overnight, but close enough that I felt foolish for not noticing sooner. It started with the door. Ethan had never cared about it before. Sometimes he left it ajar, sometimes fully open. I'd walk by and see him stretched across the floor, drawing or watching videos, humming without realizing it. And then one day he looked up from his desk and said, "Grandma, could you not come in without knocking, please?" It was polite, almost too polite. His voice trembled slightly as if he expected me to argue. I remember laughing, awkwardly, too loudly, and saying, "Of course, you're growing up, I get it." But something about the way he held his shoulders, tight and guarded, stayed with me. Over the next week, I noticed more little things, not dramatic, not alarming on their own, but forming a pattern I didn't want to acknowledge. He started locking his phone when I walked into the room. His laptop, once covered in stickers, now stayed closed, the power cord coiled neatly beside it. He took calls out on the porch in the evening, voice low, as though someone might be listening. Was this just adolescence, or was it something else? I tried to give him space. Teenagers deserved privacy, or so every parenting book had insisted. But I wasn't his parent. I was the place he came for safety. And when that safety began to crack, even a little, I felt it like a draft under a door. The real unease began on a Thursday night. I'd gone to bed early, around 10, because my knees had been aching from raking leaves. Ethan stayed up. I heard him moving in his room, soft steps, then silence, then a thud as though he'd bumped into furniture. I told myself it was nothing. But around 1:30, I woke again, this time to a sound that made my heart lurch. Ethan's voice. Not raised, not laughing, just speaking, low, intent. At first, I thought he was on the phone, but the tone didn't fit. There were pauses, not the natural rhythm of 2 people talking, but the kind of stillness that happens when someone is searching for words, and the timbre of his voice. It had the strained quality of someone trying not to cry or trying too hard to sound calm. I sat up in bed, listened. My own breathing was too loud. Who was he talking to? Or, God forbid, was he practicing something? Rehearsing? The fear hit me then, sharp and cold. Not of anything supernatural, my mind never went there, but of the real terrible things that sometimes happen to kids who hide too much. Bullying, online pressure, manipulation, adults who prey on loneliness. I had seen enough news stories, enough cautionary segments to know the signs weren't always dramatic. Sometimes they were as small as a locked door and a whisper in the dark. I swung my legs out of bed. The hallway felt longer than usual, the shadows thicker. When I reached his door, I hesitated. I knew he wanted privacy. I knew I'd promised to knock. But something in his voice, thin, almost pleading, cut through my guilt. I knocked softly. "Ethan? Honey, are you okay?" Silence. Then, faintly, the sound of a chair scraping. I opened the door. The room was dark, lit only by the faint blue from the street lamp outside. Ethan sat on the edge of his bed, his back straight, his hands limp at his sides. His face, God, I'll never forget it, was white as chalk, eyes wide, unfocused, staring into a corner of the room as though something had been there a moment before. Something he couldn't explain. "Ethan." He didn't answer at first, just blinked rapidly, then swallowed. "I'm fine," he said, but his voice was wrong, too thin, too rehearsed. My eyes adjusted to the dark. There was no phone in his hands, no earbuds, no laptop open. "Who are you talking to?" I asked gently. "No one." A lie, a small one, but a lie nonetheless, and it landed heavily between us. I sat beside him, feeling the mattress dip. "Sweetheart, I heard you. It's okay to tell me." He shook his head, barely perceptible. "It's nothing, Grandma, just talking to myself." Teenagers didn't talk to themselves for long stretches in the middle of the night. Not like that. Not with pauses that felt like responses. I wanted to press further, but he looked so fragile, so stretched thin. The pushing felt cruel. Instead, I rested a hand on his shoulder. He flinched, only slightly, but enough to make my stomach twist. "Can I leave the door open tonight?" I asked. His reaction was immediate. "No." Then softer. "Please, I just want it closed." Another crack in the safety I thought we shared. I nodded slowly. "All right, but if you need me, I'm awake now. My door's open." He didn't look at me, didn't even pretend to meet my eyes. I closed his door gently, but the moment the latch clicked, a certainty pressed against me, heavy and unwelcome. Something was wrong, and whatever it was, Ethan was hiding it. But from whom and why? I went back to bed, though sleep never came. By dawn, I already knew one thing for certain. This wasn't teenage privacy. This was fear, and fear always had a source. I barely pretended through breakfast the next morning. Ethan ate quietly, shoulders curved inward, eyes fixed on his cereal as though afraid of what he'd see if he looked up. I asked simple questions: how he slept, whether he needed anything for school, if he wanted me to pack lunch, but each one seemed to graze some invisible bruise. He answered in monosyllables, polite but distant. It wasn't defiance, it was avoidance. And avoidance in a 14-year-old rarely meant nothing. When he left for the bus, he hugged me out of habit. His arms didn't fully wrap around me the way they usually did. It felt like hugging a boy borrowed from someone else's life. As soon as the door shut, I stood in the quiet kitchen and counted the losses. It was a strange exercise, but I needed the clarity. What had I lost already? His trust, at least partially. The ease we used to share, my sense of safety, his safety, and the confidence that I knew what was happening under my own roof. What else could I lose if I did nothing? Ethan's emotional well-being, his ability to talk to me, potentially his future if this was tied to something or someone dangerous. And the most frightening thought of all, if this secrecy came from an adult influencing him, then silence on my part wasn't kindness. It was complicity. I made coffee I never drank. My hands trembled too much. It would have been easier to tell myself this was normal teenage behavior, but every instinct in me refused to quiet down. I had raised a daughter, helped raise a nephew for 2 years after my sister's divorce, worked 28 years as a school secretary. I knew what teenage moodiness looked like. I also knew what fear looked like. Ethan wasn't moody. He was scared. By midday, I made a decision I didn't want to make. I needed to intervene. Not dramatically, not by storming into his room or reading his messages, but by taking the first real step toward understanding what he was dealing with. And that meant accepting that I could be wrong, that I could embarrass him, that I could even damage our relationship. But doing nothing was worse. I sat at the dining table with a notebook. I started writing everything I had observed over the past 10 days. Door rules appearing suddenly, whispered calls on the porch, late-night talking, flinching when I touched his shoulder, avoidance at breakfast, that awful moment in the dark, his chalk-white face. It looked damning on paper, not proof, but a pattern, and patterns didn't lie. So I asked myself the central question: what could be the real-world explanations? Online harassment or bullying, involvement with older teens or adults who pressured him into secrecy, some kind of grooming or manipulation, intense anxiety or panic episodes he didn't know how to express. Every option was serious. Every option required action. But which one was it? I thought about the corner he had been staring at, the rigid posture, the terror that flashed across his face before he smothered it. That wasn't the look of a boy annoyed at being interrupted. That was the look of someone caught between two loyalties, his own safety and something he wasn't allowed to reveal. It brought back a memory I hadn't wanted to revisit. A girl at school, 13, who'd been pressured online by an older boy pretending to be 15. She withdrew from her friends. She stopped eating lunch in the cafeteria. When her mother finally intervened, it turned out the situation had escalated into threats. I remembered how pale the girl had been, how she had sat in my office gripping her sleeves like they were armor. Ethan had looked just like her. That realization settled in my stomach like ice. By early afternoon, I'd formed a fragile plan. It wasn't elegant, but it was the best I could manage while my emotions churned. Step 1, observe without confronting. Learn his patterns, his triggers, what times he became anxious. Teenagers often revealed truths unintentionally. Step 2, document anything that pointed to outside influence. Names I overheard on calls, changes in his behavior, inconsistencies in his stories. If this became a conversation with his mother, a counselor, or even authorities, I needed clarity. Step 3, create openings for him to confide in me. Not forced intimacy, not interrogation, just genuine presence. Safe space with no judgment. Step 4, if I found real red flags, take the situation to someone professional, a counselor, a mandated reporter, his school resource officer if it escalated that far. It wasn't a dramatic plan. It wasn't cinematic. It was grounded in real consequences and real procedures. But it felt like a lifeline, something to hold on to as the fear inside me swelled. Around 4 o'clock, Ethan returned from school. I watched him kick off his shoes, drop his backpack, and pause, as though checking if I was observing. His eyes flicked to mine, then away just as fast. "How was school?" I asked. "Fine." He started toward the stairs. Wait, he froze. Not dramatically, but with a small stiffness that almost broke me, as if any question I asked now had the potential to corner him. "I was thinking," I said lightly, "maybe we could do movie night tonight. I'll order pizza." He hesitated. I could see the battle in his posture, wanting normalcy but fearing disruption. "Maybe later," he said. "I've got stuff. The word young teenagers used when they didn't want to lie outright but still needed to hide something. I nodded gently. "All right, just let me know." He went upstairs. Moments later, I heard the door shut, then the lock. I breathed out slowly. He was slipping further away, and whatever held him in its orbit was tightening. That night, I stayed awake later than usual, positioned in the living room with a book I didn't read. The house settled around me. Pipes creaked. The refrigerator hummed. Sometime after midnight, I heard it again. Ethan's voice. Low, careful. Not quite pleading this time, but strained, controlled, as though negotiating with someone. I approached his door and placed a hand against the wood. His voice stopped. Silence swallowed the hallway. I didn't knock. Not this time. Not yet. I wasn't ready to break my promise. I wasn't ready to show my hand. But in that silence, one truth crystallized. I wasn't imagining this. Something or someone was shaping my grandson's world in secret. And if I didn't act carefully, strategically, I could lose him entirely. My first plan was fragile, imperfect, but it was the only path forward, because fear without action was surrender, and I would not surrender my grandson. By Friday morning, I had convinced myself to take the first real official step. Not a confrontation, not an accusation, something quieter, procedural, something that allowed me to move forward without tipping Ethan or anyone else off. I started with the school, not by marching in or making a scene, that would have been reckless, but by calling the guidance office under the pretext of checking on his academic transitions. I'd known the secretary for years. She still remembered me from the days I worked there. That familiarity made the conversation both easier and harder. I had to keep my voice steady, neutral, casual enough not to trigger alarm. I just wanted to be sure Ethan has everything he needs for the quarter, I said. She responded kindly, but when I asked if any teachers had noted unusual behavior, withdrawal, missed assignments, signs of stress, she paused. Pauses from school staff were never meaningless. "I can have the counselor call you," she offered. I thanked her, hung up, and immediately felt the tremor of consequence. That was it, the point of no return. Once I initiated a conversation with a counselor, I was no longer imagining the problem. I was taking steps based on the assumption that something might be wrong, something external, something dangerous. Schools didn't unhear concerns, even mild ones. There would be notes, follow-ups, maybe even conversations with Ethan when he was back on campus. I sat with the weight of that choice. Had I just endangered his trust? Had I pushed too soon? But then I remembered the look on his face in the dark, the way he stared at the corner like it was holding him hostage. Fear didn't come from nowhere. My phone buzzed after lunch. The school counselor, Ms. Ruiz, asked if I could talk. We spoke for 20 minutes. She didn't betray confidentiality, but she asked pointed questions. Had Ethan recently gone through any major changes? Had he withdrawn from hobbies he previously enjoyed? Had he started spending more time online late at night? Had he become secretive or jumpy? Each question matched something I had written in my notebook. When she asked if I'd noticed any signs of contact with older peers or adults outside the family, my breath caught. She said boys Ethan's age were particularly vulnerable because they often tried to handle threats alone, ashamed to seek help. "We can keep an eye on him," she said gently. "If anything concerning comes up, we'll let you know." I thanked her. But when I hung up, dread settled into my bones. If the school was concerned, then my fears weren't irrational. What I didn't expect, what I couldn't predict, was how quickly that first step would ripple. That afternoon, the first antagonistic response appeared. Not from Ethan, not from his mother, from someone I barely knew. I was in the backyard trimming dead branches off the rose bush when I heard the gate squeak. I looked up, expecting the neighbor. Instead, a man in his 30s stepped inside without bothering to knock or call out. Clean-shaven, baseball cap, polite smile stretched too thin. I recognized him vaguely, one of the older boys who sometimes hung around Ethan's friend Colin's house down the block. "Afternoon," he said, voice a touch too friendly. "Sorry to barge in, just looking for Ethan." My pulse slowed, then sharpened. Men his age didn't come looking for 14-year-olds. "He's at school," I said evenly. Right. He shoved his hands into his pockets. I wanted to return something he lent us. Us, plural, a group. Before I could respond, he added, "He told us you're kinda protective, that you tend to worry." Something in the way he said it, amused, assessing, made my skin crawl. As though he wanted me to know they'd been talking about me, as though this was a warning in polite packaging. "I worry when I need to," I replied. He gave a small laugh. "Well, maybe don't worry too much. It's just normal teen stuff. He's a good kid, knows how to keep things to himself." There it was, the message beneath the message, a reminder that Ethan had secrets and that this man believed he controlled them. "I'd appreciate it if you used the front door next time," I said, my voice steady. "The yard isn't a walkway." For a moment, the smile slipped. His eyes hardened, calculating whether to push or retreat. Then he stepped back toward the gate. "Sure thing," he said lightly. "Just wanted to clarify a few things. You have a good one." When he left, I sat down on the patio chair because my legs wouldn't hold me. That was the moment I realized two things with chilling clarity. 1, Ethan's secrecy wasn't self-generated. 2, someone older was involved, someone who already saw me as an obstacle. The fear that had followed me for days turned into something harder, denser, resolve. But I still needed proof. That evening, after Ethan went to bed, I began reviewing our home network activity. Not by spying, just by checking the router logs, something any adult managing a household might reasonably do. Most teenagers didn't understand how routers tracked connections. Around midnight, I found it. A device labeled only as Guest 4F had connected to our Wi-Fi 3 times in the last week. Always between midnight and 2 a.m., always while Ethan was awake. The device wasn't his laptop, wasn't his phone, wasn't anything we owned. Someone had been connecting from outside the house, through the window, the backyard, maybe even the street. The Wi-Fi range extended to the back fence. My breath caught. My fingers froze on the keyboard. This wasn't imagination, wasn't teenage angst, wasn't normal. This was outside contact, physically close enough to connect, repeatedly in the middle of the night. A tether between Ethan and someone he shouldn't have been near. My first direct proof. The world contracted around me in a single quiet beat. Whoever had visited that afternoon wasn't a random passerby. He was part of something organized enough to communicate, to monitor, to show up when I took my first official step. They knew I had begun digging, and they wanted me to stop. But I'd crossed the point of no return, and now I had proof, thin, fragile, but real. Something and someone was coming for my grandson's trust, and I would not let them take it. The night I discovered the unknown device on our network, sleep was out of the question. I sat at the dining table long after the house settled into silence, staring at the router logs as though they might rearrange themselves into something less horrifying. 3 late-night connections, an unknown device, a man showing up in my yard the same day I spoke to the school. This wasn't coincidence. This was a boundary being tested or broken. By morning, I realized I couldn't rely on instincts alone. My plan needed structure. It needed teeth. Step 1, secure the house. Step 2, secure Ethan. Step 3, identify exactly who was trying to reach him. Step 4, push back, quietly, strategically, until they had no room left. I started small. I reset the router password, created a new guest network with 0 range beyond the living room, pulled coverage back so sharply that anyone outside the walls would lose access instantly. I added parental filters, not to spy on Ethan, but to limit outside contact. A 14-year-old couldn't bypass them easily, not without help. That afternoon, I installed simple motion lights around the backyard. The kind neighbors used. Nothing suspicious, nothing that would tip Ethan off, but it gave me a perimeter, a sense of visibility. I didn't tell him. Not yet. Telling him meant triggering his fear or his guilt or whatever influence he was under. And if someone had pressured him to keep secrets, confronting him directly could backfire. Still, I felt the shift almost immediately. 2 days later, on Sunday, the first retaliation came. Ethan had gone out to toss a basketball in the driveway. I was folding laundry in the living room, glancing occasionally through the front window, making sure he wasn't on his phone with those older boys. That's when a car I didn't recognize, dark blue, dented on the side, windows tinted darker than legal, rolled slowly down the street. Not cruising, not passing, creeping. It stopped right in front of my house. I stiffened. Ethan paused mid-dribble, his shoulders tightening. He didn't wave. He didn't look surprised. He looked resigned, like he'd been expecting them. A man leaned out the passenger side window. Someone older, late 20s, early 30s. Not the one who'd walked into my backyard, but with the same smug, evaluating expression. The kind men use when they think they hold all the leverage. "Ethan," he called lightly, "come here a second." The tone was friendly. The intent wasn't. I stepped onto the porch before Ethan could take a single step. "Is there a reason you're stopping in front of my house?" I asked, keeping my voice calm, measured. Both men turned their eyes toward me. The driver smirked. The passenger looked annoyed. "We're just talking to our friend," the driver said. "No need to get involved." "He's 14, I answered. "You're adults. That means I'm involved." The passenger opened his mouth, probably to argue, but the way I stared at him must have been enough. He hesitated, glanced at Ethan, then back at me. "You're making a fuss over nothing," he finally said. "He just owes us something." "Owes," the word sliced through me. "Whatever you think he owes," I said, "you won't be collecting it here." Something cold flashed across the passenger's face, a warning. He leaned out farther. "You've been asking questions. School stuff, internet stuff." He let the implication hang there, heavy and unmistakable. Maybe don't. The air tightened around me. Not a threat of violence, a threat of escalation. Social, psychological, strategic. "You need to leave," I said, "now." The passenger chuckled. "You think you can keep him locked up? Kids don't stay under control forever." It wasn't the words that chilled me. It was the certainty with which he said them. Ethan stood frozen, eyes wide, trapped between fear of them and fear of me knowing the truth. His silence was the final confirmation. These weren't new acquaintances. This had been going on for a while. The driver tapped the roof of the car. "We'll catch up later," he said to Ethan. "You know how to reach us." "No," I cut in. "He doesn't." The passenger's smirk disappeared. For one tense second, the weight of their eyes pressed against me, calculating, irritated, considering whether to push harder. Then the driver eased his foot onto the accelerator. The car rolled away, slow and deliberate. A statement. When it turned the corner, Ethan's shoulders sagged in utter relief and shame. I walked to him. "Inside," I said gently. He obeyed without a word. Inside the hallway, he finally whispered, "You shouldn't have done that." "I should," I replied, "and I did." "They'll be mad." "Good." He seemed startled by my tone. I softened slightly. "Ethan." "Honey." "How long have they been contacting you?" He shook his head fast, too fast. "It's not what you think." But there was no conviction behind the words. I didn't force him. Pressing now would push him right back into their influence. Instead, I placed a hand on his back, not guiding, just anchoring. "You're not in trouble," I said. "You're not alone. Whatever they told you, whatever they made you believe, you can tell me when you're ready." He swallowed hard. His eyes glistened for a second, then shut tight. "I can't. Not won't. Can't." Meaning someone had taught him consequences. I didn't push further. That night, I enacted step 3. I called his mother, not to panic her, but to arrange for him to stay home with her for a few days under the excuse of helping her with appointments. She agreed easily. She always appreciated the help. It gave me space, and I needed space. Without Ethan in the house, I could think, breathe, plan. Those few days were the closest thing to rest I'd had since the whispering first began behind his door. Not relaxation, rest. The quiet necessary to sharpen my mind. I used those days to secure more evidence, to map out the names of the boys in the neighborhood, to identify the ones who had recently graduated high school but still hovered around younger kids. I spoke casually with neighbors, teachers, the mail carrier who'd seen too much on this street for 20 years. Patterns began to emerge. Names floated, stories aligned, connections formed. These men, the ones circling Ethan, weren't random. They had a reputation for involving younger boys in things they shouldn't. Late-night meetups, group chats shielded from parents, dares that escalated into leverage. Ethan hadn't been chosen. He had been targeted. By the fourth day, I had a clearer picture of what I was fighting. A network of manipulative older teens and 20-somethings who fed off secrecy and guilt. They weren't hardened criminals, but they didn't need to be. Harm didn't require criminal records. It only required influence over a vulnerable child. And influence was exactly what they had until now. They'd tried intimidation. They'd tried showing up uninvited. They'd tried hinting at what they knew. They expected I would back down the way other adults had. They were wrong, because this time they had underestimated the wrong grandmother. And I was ready for the next step. When Ethan returned to my house on Thursday evening, I felt the difference before he even stepped inside. He wasn't relaxed, far from it, but something in him had loosened, like a rope no longer pulled taut. Maybe a few days away from those boys had cleared the immediate fog. Maybe being with his mother reminded him of a world not shaped by older kids demanding loyalty. But the struggle wasn't gone, just muted. He dropped his backpack by the door and hovered, waiting to see if I was angry or disappointed. I wasn't either. I couldn't afford to be. Not when he was still caught in something I didn't fully understand. "Hungry?" I asked. He nodded. It was a small victory. We ate dinner quietly. I didn't press him for explanations, didn't prod at wounds he wasn't ready to expose. I simply existed beside him, steady, calm, predictable, the kind of presence manipulation couldn't easily replace. But the lull didn't last. The next morning, the temptation arrived. Not through a dramatic confrontation or another suspicious visit. No, these boys weren't blunt instruments. They were opportunistic, subtle, testing boundaries in small increments. And they always chose their moments well. It started with Ethan's phone buzzing at breakfast. He flinched. The spoon in his hand trembled. He didn't reach for the phone, not immediately. He stared at it the way someone stares at a wound they know will hurt when touched. "Go ahead," I said softly. "It's okay." He unlocked it, shoulders still tense. A message appeared. Just one. But I saw enough of the preview to know it wasn't innocent. "Come by later. We miss you. No drama. Promise." Miss you. No drama. Promise. The language of grooming wasn't always sinister in tone. Often it mimicked friendship, camaraderie, belonging. They were trying to reel him back in with gentleness now that intimidation hadn't worked. His face flickered between fear and longing. That longing frightened me the most. "Ethan," I said carefully, "you don't have to answer that." "I know." His voice was thin. "But if I don't, they'll just keep texting." "That's their choice," I replied, "not yours." He didn't answer. He put the phone down and pushed his cereal away. He wasn't hungry anymore. Later in the morning, after he left for school, I sat in the living room staring at the empty space where his fear used to sit like a second presence. I wasn't naive. I knew the quiet days were the most deceptive. Antagonists always retreated to observe, to adjust strategy. And I was right. Around noon, my phone buzzed, a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Hello?" A smooth voice flowed through the line, too familiar, too casual. "Ms. Hart?" My spine stiffened. Only school staff or people with a very specific intention use my last name. "This is she. You don't know me," the voice continued, "but I've seen you around. I'm with Colin's group, the guys Ethan hangs out with." I closed my eyes briefly. There it was, the soft approach. "What do you want?" "Oh, nothing dramatic." He gave a low laugh. "Just clearing the air. I think there's been a misunderstanding." "About what?" "You trying to isolate the kid, lock down his phone, keep him from the people he chooses to talk to." "I'm protecting him," I said. "Something you should have been doing instead of involving a 14-year-old in whatever you're running." Silence, then a tone shift, not harsh but oily. "You're making this harder than it has to be. We like Ethan. He's good with us. He fits in, better than he does anywhere else." There it was, the hook, belonging. "That doesn't give grown men the right to pull him into situations he can't understand," I replied. "We're not hurting him. We're helping him." Another small pause. "You could help too. Just ease up. Let him have some space. Let him come by. Let him talk." "And in return?" I asked, though I already knew. "In return, we stay civil. We don't cause problems. Everyone gets along." He wanted compliance, submission dressed up as cooperation. "I'm not bargaining over a child," I said flatly. A beat, then voice colder. "You should, because if you push, we push back." I hung up before he could say more. Threats dressed as invitations, manipulation masked as kindness, flattery mixed with warnings. This was their temptation phase. Offer comfort, offer friendship, offer a way to end the drama. And when the door shut, they'd tighten the grip again. I sat staring at the silent phone, letting my heartbeat settle. I wasn't shaken. Not anymore. Something in me had hardened in those days while Ethan was away. Something cold, sharp, steady. But I also knew I couldn't do this alone. Not for lack of strength, for lack of perspective. I needed support, not just emotional, but strategic. Someone outside the situation who could see the broader picture without the fog of grandmotherly fear. My first instinct was Ellen, my neighbor 2 houses down, retired social worker, someone who'd seen too many versions of older boys hanging around younger ones, someone who knew how manipulation worked. I called her after lunch. She came over within 10 minutes, jacket still half-zipped, a look of concern etched into her face before I even spoke. I told her everything, carefully, chronologically, without dramatizing and without omitting the facts. She listened the way professionals listen, without judgment, without interruption. When I finished, she exhaled slowly. "You're dealing with a control group," she said. "Older boys who use loyalty, shame, and secrecy to keep younger kids compliant. It's more common than people think." "So what do I do?" "You've already done the hardest part," she said. "You broke the initial influence. Now you need stability, for both of you." She talked me through resources, escalation paths, signs of danger, ways to approach Ethan without triggering deeper withdrawal. She told me what was normal teen behavior and what wasn't. She validated every instinct I had doubted. "You're not overreacting," she said firmly. "You're protecting him." I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear those words. By the time she left, a weight had lifted. Not completely, just enough for me to breathe. That evening, Ethan asked if we could watch a movie. I said yes before he finished the sentence. We sat on the couch, he in his usual hoodie, me with a blanket over my knees. And for the first time in weeks, I saw a flicker of the boy he used to be. Not free, not fully safe, but reaching. And reaching mattered. Outside, somewhere in the dark, I knew those men were waiting, watching for signs of weakness, hoping I'd back down. But I wasn't backing down. Not now, not ever. Their temptation had failed. Their friendliness had failed. And next, they would show their true faces. I would be ready. They waited 3 days before returning. 3 long, strangely quiet days, during which Ethan behaved like someone walking between worlds. He stayed close to me, but not clingy. He kept his phone near, but not hidden. He seemed to be sensing the air around him, waiting to see which side would move first. I didn't push him. I didn't ask about the messages. I simply gave him predictability. Meals, conversation, a home that felt solid. On the 4th afternoon, the mask arrived. It happened right after school. I had just pulled into the driveway with groceries when a silver sedan parked at the curb. Too polished, too clean. A different car from before, their presentation car. 2 young men stepped out. These weren't the scruffy ones. These were the smooth ones. The charmers. Crisp hoodies, tidy haircuts, smiles ready-made. Ethan froze beside me, half-turned toward the front door. I put a hand lightly on his arm, not holding him back, just grounding him. "Afternoon," the taller one said, raising a hand as if greeting neighbors. His voice was warm, almost disarming. We were hoping to catch Ethan. "No," I said plainly. "You're not talking to him." The shorter one laughed, a soft practice sound. "We're not here to cause trouble. Really, we think things got blown out of proportion." I recognized the tactic immediately. Recast the conflict as misunderstanding. Make me the overreactive one. Soften the borders of guilt. "You came to my house uninvited," I said. "That's not a misunderstanding." He tilted his head with feigned patience. "Look, we're trying to be respectful. We care about the kid. We just want to make sure there's no bad blood." Ethan shifted beside me, conflicted. His silence was a tug of war. I stepped slightly in front of him, not to shield, but to anchor the space between them and him. "I don't have bad blood," I replied. "I have boundaries." "Boundaries can be flexible," the taller one said. That sentence chilled me. Flexible, meaning negotiable, meaning something they believed they had the right to reshape. I kept my voice level. "Not here." The shorter one let out a slow breath. "Miss Hart, you're being difficult." "I'm being protective." "And we're being patient," he said. "Don't make us stop being patient." That was the shift, the first drop of venom behind the smile. Ethan's fingers twitched against his side. I saw shame, fear, confusion. The spin of loyalty. They knew exactly how to twist it. So I changed tactics. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't threaten, I didn't plead. I used clarity. "Ethan won't be spending time with any of you," I said. "Not now, not ever. If you need to communicate something to him, you can send it through me." They exchanged a slow look, a look that said, "She's not breaking," a look that said, "Adjust strategy." "Communication through you," the taller one repeated. "Come on, he's not a little kid." "He's 14, I replied. "That's exactly a kid. And he makes his own choices. Not while adults pressure him." The taller one stepped closer, not threateningly, but assertively, wearing a smile like a mask he could remove whenever he chose. "We're not pressuring him. We're including him. You're the one isolating him. You're making him choose." I felt Ethan stiffen behind me. The guilt tactic landed exactly where they intended. And that was the danger. They knew how to pull at the emotional seams of a boy who didn't want to disappoint anyone. "You think he wants to be cut off from us?" the shorter one added. "You think that's what makes him safe?" Safe. The word tasted rotten in their mouths. I didn't answer immediately. I met their eyes calmly, one by one, letting the silence force them to expose themselves. "I think," I said finally, that your involvement isn't about him at all. It's about control, and you're losing it. The mask slid, just a fraction, but enough. The taller one's smile tightened. You don't know what you're talking about. But you do, I said. A long moment passed. Then he turned his attention to Ethan. Hey man, you good? You want us gone? Or you want to talk? Manipulation, weaponized. Force a public choice. Shame him for the wrong one. Ethan looked trapped. His eyes darted between them and me, like a kid trying to choose which burning room to leap from. I stepped aside just enough so he could see my face fully. My expression stayed steady. Not urging, not pleading. Just there. It's okay, I said softly. You don't owe anyone anything. He swallowed, closed his eyes and whispered, I don't want to talk. The shorter one's mask shattered. His eyes flashed with pure anger before he smoothed his face again. Right, okay, so that's how it is. The taller one exhaled sharply through his nose. You're making this worse for yourself, he said to Ethan. Not a threat, but a promise. I stepped forward, meeting his gaze without flinching. Leave, now. He held my eyes, searching for weakness, for fear, for hesitation. He found fear. Yes, I wasn't made of stone, but he also found resolve. They backed away slowly, not defeated, but simmering. The way people retreat, not because they've lost, but because they must regroup. We'll be around, the shorter one said coldly. Don't think this ends here. Goodbye, I said. They left. The sedan pulled away too fast. A spray of gravel hit the curb. When the sound faded, the world felt too quiet. Ethan stood frozen, his breathing shallow, his hands shaking. I put a hand on his shoulder. He didn't pull away this time. He stayed still, just long enough for my hand to matter. Inside, once the door closed, he whispered, They're going to be so mad. I know, I said. But that's their anger, not yours. You don't carry it. He nodded shakily. I didn't know what to do. You did exactly the right thing. He looked at me, eyes wide, not seeking reassurance, but believing it for the first time. And the fear inside me, sharp, cold, electric, shifted. Not fading, but reshaping into something steadier. Determination. They were angry. They were regrouping. They were losing control. And now they knew Ethan wasn't theirs to handle. He was mine to protect. And I was nowhere near done. The turning point came sooner than I expected. After the masked visit, after Ethan told them he didn't want to talk, the atmosphere around our home changed. Not dramatically, not through a single event, more like a steady tightening. Cars idled a little too long on our street. Groups of older boys lingered at the corner, pretending to scroll through their phones. A familiar figure, the one who wandered into my backyard weeks earlier, walked past the house twice a day, always glancing toward the windows. They were waiting, watching, looking for an opening. And Ethan knew. He moved through the house with wary awareness, his eyes flicking toward the windows before he sat down, his shoulders tightening when he heard a car door outside. He wasn't panicking, just bracing for the pressure to return stronger. One evening, 3 days after their attempted friendly visit, I heard him whisper to himself in the hallway, It's my fault. They're mad because of me. I stepped out of the kitchen before he noticed me listening. No, I said firmly. They're angry because they're losing control. That has nothing to do with you. He shut his eyes like he wanted to believe it but didn't know how. I placed a steady hand on his back. You didn't cause this. They did. He nodded once, not convinced, but willing to lean on my certainty for now. That night, I heard footsteps outside our house around 9. Calm, deliberate, crunching over the gravel near the side gate. Ethan was upstairs doing homework. I stepped onto the back porch with the porch light off, watched the silhouette move past the fence line, then disappear into the alley. They were probing, testing the edges. And I knew what came next. They weren't going to intimidate us from afar anymore. They wanted a confrontation. They wanted to force a choice. They wanted me out of the way, and part of me, cold, resolved, welcomed it. Because it meant I finally could pull the truth into the open. The confrontation came the next evening. Ethan was upstairs, shower running. I stood at the kitchen counter rinsing dishes when 3 hard knocks rattled the front door. Not polite, not hesitant, purposeful. I dried my hands, walked to the door, and opened it only halfway. 3 of them stood there. The smooth-talking pair from earlier, and behind them, the backyard visitor, the one who had smirked when he trespassed. All 3 watched me with expectation, confidence, and under the surface, irritation. The tall one smiled first. "Evening, Miss Hart." "Go home," I said. "We should talk," he replied, inside. No. The shorter one rocked on his heels. "We're not here to fight. We just want to clear things up." "Then speak from there," I said. "You're not coming in." Backyard man stepped forward. His posture was relaxed, but his jaw was clenched. "You think you're doing the right thing, but you're hurting him more than helping." "Hurting him how?" I asked, my tone flat. "You're isolating him. He feels guilty. He feels torn. He doesn't know who to trust." "You mean he's not trusting you?" I corrected. "That's the issue, isn't it?" Their expressions tightened in unison. The tall one forced a smile. "Look, lady, Ms. Hart." "Fine, Ms. Hart. You're making this into a battle. It doesn't have to be." "That depends on whether you stop contacting my grandson." They exchanged looks, quick, silent communication, a strategy shift. The shorter one stepped forward with a sigh of exaggerated patience. "You don't get it. We're not dangerous. We're helping him. He needed somewhere to fit in. Then you gave him secrecy," I said, "and fear and pressure." "No," he insisted. "We gave him choice." "Adults don't give 14-year-olds choice." My voice stayed cool enough that even they seemed caught off guard. "You give them direction, influence, pressure dressed up as freedom." The backyard man muttered, "This is pointless." "No," I said quietly, "this is clarity." The tall one's smile evaporated. He stepped closer until he stood directly at the threshold, close enough to look down at me. "You don't know what you're messing with." I held his stare. "Neither do you." He bristled, but I didn't step back. "I know what you've been doing," I continued. "The late-night messages, the pressure, the guilt, the threats, the Wi-Fi connections from outside my house." They stiffened. That last part struck a nerve. "You've been digging," the tall one said, voice dropping. "Yes," I said simply. "And you think that scares us?" "I think it should." Backyard man scoffed. "Lady, this was supposed to be simple. The kid hangs out, we keep things chill, everyone gets along." "You mean he listens to you, follows your lead, keeps your secrets?" He leaned forward. "You keep talking like we're criminals." "I haven't called the police yet," I said quietly. "That's restraint, not assumption." The silence that followed was the thickest yet. "You wouldn't," the shorter one whispered. "You're right," I said. "Not yet. But if you come near him again, if you message him again, if you step onto this street again, yes, I will." The tall one exhaled sharply and turned to his friends. "She thinks she's in control." "I am," I replied. Backyard man finally snapped. "You're pushing us," he said, his voice low, furious. "You don't want to see what happens when we're pushed." I took a slow breath, grounding myself. I wasn't fearless, but I was steady. "If you wanted to scare me," I said, "you should have tried before I found out exactly who you are." They froze. I continued. "Before I spoke to the counselor, before the school started asking questions, before your names came up in neighborhood conversations, before 2 of your friends were reported last year for the same behavior." Shock flickered through their expressions, a crack in the armor. "You think you're the first group like this on this street? You think adults don't talk?" My voice stayed calm, dead calm. the kind that unnerves more than shouting. You aren't subtle. You aren't original. You're predictable. The tall one stepped back, just 1 inch, but enough. Backyard man hissed, "You don't know anything." "I know enough." I let the silence settle, heavy and undeniable. Then I said the words that ended the conversation. "You're done here." The tall one's mask broke completely. Rage flashed across his features, anger not at me, but at the fact that they had lost control of the narrative. Backyard man shook his head with the tight, jerky motion of someone trying not to lash out. "This isn't over," he muttered. "Yes, it is," I said. And somehow they believed me, because one by one they stepped back. Not because they wanted to, because they had no move left. Their leverage evaporated the moment I exposed what they relied on most: secrecy. They walked to their car slowly, simmering with frustration. They didn't look back. And when the engine revved and the sedan disappeared down the street, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady, cold, certain. The fear was still in me, but it had transformed. Not into dread, into fuel. They were unraveling. The climax was shifting. They had played their hand. Now it was my turn. For the first time in weeks, the house felt still, not tense, not watchful, not bracing for another knock. Still. But it wasn't peace. Not yet. Stillness was the moment between a storm's end and the realization that something significant had shifted. I didn't expect the next move to come from Ethan. The morning after the confrontation, he came downstairs slowly, pausing at the bottom step like he was deciding whether to speak. I was at the table, reviewing paperwork I hoped I wouldn't need. Notes from the school counselor, a printed log of Wi-Fi connections, the neighbor's written statement about seeing the boys outside several nights in a row. He watched me for a long moment, uncertain. "Grandma?" I set my pen down and met his eyes. "Yes, sweetheart." He hesitated. Then, "Can we talk? Like, really talk?" My chest tightened. I nodded, gesturing for him to sit. He didn't. He paced once, ran a hand through his hair, then finally dropped into the chair across from me. "I didn't know how to tell you," he said, voice thin. "They weren't like that at the beginning." Of course they weren't. It never begins with threats. "How did it start?" I asked. He swallowed hard. "Colin introduced me to them. He said they were cool. They liked that I drew stuff. They kept telling me I was talented, that older guys thought I was good. I'd never heard that before. It felt nice." There it was, validation, the first hook. And then they started asking for things, little things at first. Help with homework, picking up snacks from stores near school, joining their group chats. They said I was part of the crew. His voice trembled. Then they said I had to prove loyalty. Nothing bad at first. Show up when they told me to, keep secrets, don't tell teachers. And later, I prompted gently. He looked down. They started yelling when I didn't respond fast enough, saying I owed them, saying they could make things bad for me at school, and they knew stuff about me, stuff I didn't tell them, about Mom, about how I don't like big groups, about how I hate math class. "So they gathered information on you," I said quietly. He nodded, shame flickering across his face like a shadow. I thought if I kept them happy, they'd leave me alone. I reached across the table, placing my hand over his. "You don't have to keep dangerous people happy. That's not your job. It never was." His eyes filled. He blinked fast. "I'm sorry." "Don't you dare apologize," I said. "They targeted you. They manipulated you. And I'm proud of you for telling me now." He exhaled shakily, relief and exhaustion mixing on his face. It wasn't full healing, not yet, but it was the first honest step toward it. "Grandma, what if they come back?" "They won't," I said. And for the first time, I truly believed it, because I already knew my next move. I met with the school counselor the same afternoon, in person, No phone call, no ambiguity. Ms. Ruiz listened to everything Ethan had told me, her expression tightening in the way professionals do when they hear a pattern they recognize too well. "I'm glad you came," she said quietly. "These boys have been on the radar before. Adults who hang around younger teens, offering attention, then leverage. We need to involve the resource officer." "I agree," I said. She asked if Ethan was willing to give a statement. I didn't pressure him. I asked. He agreed, voice barely above a whisper. Not because he wanted retribution, because he wanted it to stop. The resource officer, a calm, thick-shouldered man named Turner, handled it with respect. He didn't talk down to Ethan. He didn't dramatize. He simply asked clear questions. Names, places, times, what they asked, what they threatened, how close they got to the house, whether drugs or criminal activity were involved. To Ethan's relief, and mine, there were no drugs, no criminal enterprises, just control, a hierarchy built on secrecy and pressure. "That's enough for intervention," Officer Turner said firmly, "and it's enough for us to step in before it escalates." He explained the plan. Contact the parents of the older boys, issue warnings, restrict them from the school grounds, and monitor their behavior. If they crossed any lines, any charges would follow. Trespassing, harassment, contributing to the delinquency of a minor. Real consequences, legal ones. And they wouldn't be able to hide behind casual smiles or friendly tones anymore. As we left the meeting, I saw a shift in Ethan's posture. He stood straighter, breathed deeper. On the drive home, he whispered, "I didn't know adults actually help." I squeezed his hand. Good adults do. The fallout began quickly. The first call came from a mother 2 blocks away, a woman I recognized from neighborhood gatherings. Her voice was tight, embarrassed, furious. Officer Turner had spoken to her about her 21-year-old son. "I had no idea he was hanging around younger teens," she said. "Thank you for coming forward, truly." Another parent approached me at the grocery store, apologizing with a trembling voice. Shame rippled through the community. Shame not at me, but at their own lack of vigilance. Teenagers notice everything, and within 2 days, everyone knew the group of older boys had been restricted from school property. Their reputations, once polished through charm, began to crumble. Teachers watched them, parents whispered, peers distanced. Their power wasn't just broken, it was dismantled publicly. Ethan watched it from afar with a mix of relief and quiet grief. Manipulation leaves residue. Shame, confusion, anger at oneself. One evening he said, "I thought they were my friends." "You wanted connection," I replied, "and they exploited that. That doesn't make you foolish. It makes them cruel." He nodded, slowly, healing. A week later, the tallest boy, the one whose charm had cracked into anger, walked past our house with his hood up. He didn't look at the windows this time. He walked faster. He didn't linger. That was the moment I knew they had lost, all of them. Not in some cinematic explosion of justice, but in the quiet, social, legal way real harm is stopped. Boundaries, exposure, community pressure, authority intervention, zero secrets left for them to hide behind. And when power built on secrecy collapses, it doesn't fall gracefully, it falls completely. One evening, a full week after the school meeting, Ethan came downstairs with his sketchbook tucked under his arm. I hadn't seen him draw in weeks. He sat beside me on the couch and opened it to a fresh page. "You think it's okay if I start drawing again?" he asked. "It's more than okay," I said. "It's yours." He began sketching slowly, pencil gliding across the page. Not for them. Not to impress older boys who fed on his eagerness. For himself. For the first time in months, I saw the boy I knew, not frightened, not conflicted, not pulled between worlds, free. The victory wasn't loud. It wasn't triumphant. It wasn't a single moment. It was a series of quiet ones, each one reclaiming a piece of him. And watching him draw, I realized I hadn't just protected him, I'd gotten him back. They were finished, their influence gone, their leverage shattered, their circle dispersed, and Ethan was safe. That was victory, complete, uncompromising, and utterly ours. The weeks that followed settled into a quieter rhythm, the kind of rhythm I hadn't realized I'd been craving. Not silence exactly. Our house had never been silent, but a steadiness, a predictability that felt like safety. It began with small things. Ethan started coming downstairs earlier in the mornings. He lingered by the counter while I made coffee. He asked questions, normal questions, not the tense, guarded ones I'd grown used to. He told me about a science project, about a kid in his class who tripped during gym, about a book they were reading in English, things he hadn't shared in months. I knew he was healing when he laughed, an unguarded, sudden sound that startled both of us. It was short, but real. He blinked, almost surprised by it. I smiled, not pointing it out. Some moments don't need commentary. His phone stayed visible on the table now. Notifications came from classmates, not from unknown numbers or group chats that filled him with dread. He started deleting old threads. Not angrily, not dramatically, just clearing space, one message at a time. The drawings returned too. Every evening he'd sit at the kitchen table with his sketchbook open. Sometimes he doodled. Sometimes he worked intensely, brow furrowed the way his mother used to when she was deep in thought. Art flowed out of him like it had been waiting for permission. One night, he showed me a finished page. It was a sketch of our backyard, peaceful, balanced, with the light falling softly across the grass. He didn't say why he chose that scene. He didn't have to. That sketch meant something had shifted back inside him. But while our home softened, the outside world dealt with the aftermath. The older boys didn't recover the way they expected to. The tall one, the slick talker, got suspended from the community college he'd been attending part-time. Not for violence or anything dramatic, but for violating campus boundaries. Word traveled fast, and administrators didn't take kindly to young adults manipulating minors. The short one, the charming one, struggled too. Neighbors stopped greeting him. Parents watched him with narrowed eyes. The easy rapport he'd once thrived on evaporated the moment adults publicly associated him with inappropriate influence over younger teens. Social consequences weren't immediate but steady. People distanced themselves. Invitations disappeared. He grew defensive online, posting vague, bitter messages, the kind you could read through without knowing details. Backyard man, the first one to trespass, moved out of his mother's house within a month. She had been embarrassed, yes, but also furious. The resource officer made it clear the next incident would bring charges. Rumor had it she'd given him an ultimatum, leave or comply with house rules. He chose to leave. But independence didn't suit him. He lost his part-time job after showing up late multiple times. His landlord posted online about noise complaints and long nights of loitering friends. Their little crew, once so sure of its influence, fractured quickly. Without younger boys to command, they had no structure, no purpose, no unearned power to feed their egos. People underestimated how fast such groups dissolve without someone small to orbit around. Meanwhile, Ethan's world expanded again. The school counselor met with him twice, gently guiding him through residual guilt and confusion. She explained grooming, pressure tactics, emotional manipulation, clinical terms that helped him see the situation from a wider, more neutral perspective. He absorbed everything. He asked thoughtful questions. He learned how to recognize similar patterns in the future. One afternoon after school, he came home more confident than usual. "Grandma?" he said, sitting at the table with a snack. Ms. Ruiz said I handled everything really well. You did, I answered. You did incredibly well. He nodded, but not in a self-congratulatory way. More like someone acknowledging a truth for the first time instead of rejecting it. Then he added, I'm not scared of them anymore. I set down my mug. What changed? He thought for a moment. I realized they're not strong. They just act like they are. He paused. You were stronger. My mouth tightened. Not pride, not modesty. Something else. Something heavier. You were strong too, I said. You trusted me. And you told the truth when it mattered. He smiled. The soft, shy kind I remembered from years ago. Thanks for not giving up on me. I reached across the table. I never would. Our evenings became quiet again. Not tense quiet, but warm, gentle. He helped me prep dinners. I taught him a few of his mother's favorite recipes. He washed dishes while humming under his breath. The normalcy felt like a victory all its own. One Saturday morning, we drove to the local art store. I told him he could pick out anything he wanted, sketchbooks, pencils, charcoal, whatever caught his eye. His eyes lit up in a way I hadn't seen since he was 10. He took his time, selecting tools like they were rare, precious objects. When we reached the checkout, he whispered, This feels like starting over. You're allowed to start over, I said. He smiled again, not a boy recovering from fear, just a boy living. There were moments, fleeting but real, when old anxiety flickered in him. When he heard loud footsteps outside, when a car with tinted windows paused at a stop sign too long, when a group of older teens laughed loudly near the park. He stiffened each time. But now, instead of retreating, he looked at me. And each time, we navigated it together, slowly, realistically, with grounded reassurance, not false promises. Healing wasn't linear, but it was happening. As for me, my life didn't return to normal. It became something better, sharper, more intentional. I woke with gratitude instead of dread. I cooked breakfast without listening for footsteps outside the window. I gardened without glancing over the fence for silhouettes. I slept with my door fully closed for the first time since everything began. Ethan's mother noticed the change, too. One evening, when she came to pick him up, she said quietly, He's himself again. I nodded, fighting emotion. He's stronger than he thinks. She hugged me, tight. Thank you for not ignoring it. I didn't answer, because ignoring it had never been an option. The neighborhood settled, the whispers faded. Trust returned piece by piece. By the beginning of the next month, Ethan stood in the backyard one afternoon, taller, steadier, sketchbook under his arm, and said, Grandma, I've been thinking about joining the art club at school. I felt something warm open inside me. I think that's a wonderful idea. And maybe talk to the new kid in my class. He likes drawing, too. Connection. Healthy, peer-level connection. Something he'd been deprived of for months. You should, I said. He smiled, real, open, free, and headed inside. I watched him go, listened to the screen door click behind him. In that moment, the house didn't just feel safe. It felt alive again. And that was the truest proof of victory. Not the downfall of the boys who tried to control him. Not the formal warnings. Not the social collapse of their circle. But this, the quiet, steady, ordinary life returning to a child who deserved it. A life he walked into with confidence, not fear. And I followed behind him, knowing we had earned every ounce of peace now filling our home. Now that everything is settled, I find myself thinking about how close we came to losing him, not to violence, but to influence, to secrecy, to the kind of pressure that grows quietly in the dark. And it makes me wonder, what would you have done, standing at that door, hearing those voices, seeing your child pulled away inch by inch? Would you have stepped back or stepped in? If this story stayed with you, leave a comment, share your thoughts, and subscribe for more. Thank you for being here, for reading, and for being part of this community.